Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, the election is 34 days away. Can you believe that we have moved that close to it being crunch time? And yes, folks, it really, literally is crunch time as I sit here and speak into this microphone, conveying this message unto you. But what does it all mean? We know that this has been one of the most bizarre election cycles of living memory. We've seen it get down into the mud, and there has been all sorts of personalized ad hominem attacks that went through the primary process. And of course, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media has reiterated to the point of ad nauseum that this is the election cycle in which we are supposed to discard with conventional wisdom. Nevertheless, I don't think that we should be discarding with conventional wisdom. I think that by looking at conventional wisdom, we can begin to see exactly what it is that haunts, afflicts, and ails this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. Now, I know it's not easy to hear that. It's not something that we want to hear, but it is something that comes to the forefront, particularly with the way things have shaped up or turned out in this election cycle thus far, and it really doesn't show signs of improving. With only 34 days left, Trump has really got to get his act together, but that is asking the impossible of a man who simply does not wish to change. He is just set in his ways, and that's all he cares about, is going forth and doing things the way that he's always done it, come hell or high water, irrespective of the detrimental or deleterious impact and consequences that it will have on the election cycle and on the electoral process in general. But what we know is that there's still a lot on people's minds. And there's good reason for people to have a lot on their minds. There's nothing that has been said or done which should really allow the people to feel comfortable with the way things have shaped out. Trump has not gone forth and said anything that would convince us that he is any more qualified to wield the reins of political power in this beloved homeland of ours. And in fact, he is just giving fodder for the Democrats to use against him. I mean, I've never seen a candidate just so willingly give ammunition to his opposition. I've never seen a non-conservative so vociferously proclaim that he is a conservative, and me doth think he protests too much. The reason I say that is when you look at his track record all throughout his life, he has espoused progressive positions. He has never been a dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionist, and that should be sending up the red flags for the decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens. Unfortunately, that simply does not seem to be the case. We see that the apologists keep going forth and just prostrating themselves in front of his every word, splitting hairs to the point of where it's not even microscopic anymore, just to make their fearless leader look good. But it's not about a cult of personality. We don't honor the individual who goes into the office. It's about honoring the office itself. And that is one of the major disconnects that has been a constant theme and a common thread throughout this fiasco of a presidential election cycle. And I wish it weren't so, but that literally is what is going on. And of course, the ones who are probably suffering the most here are those who switch to Trump in the hopes he'd become more presidential. They must be panicking right now because he's had every given available opportunity to do so, and he simply has failed to do so. There's nothing there which convinces me that he is going to change, because he has no inkling to change. He has no desire to change. And I think that that comes out to spell disaster for the decent, hardworking, red-blooded American citizens as well. Why? It's because their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights hang in the balance. And stated in another way, what it really means is that our capacity as the popular sovereigns of this constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic of ours is in dire threat. Trump is a clear and present danger to our representative Republican form of government. There really is no other way to describe it. And it shows no signs of improving at any time within the foreseeable future. I wish that weren't the case. I wish that it was different. Unfortunately, that is the case. That is what we're encountering, and it is not getting better. But perhaps one of the most poignant examples that we can point to with the people who are probably panicking right now is that of Mark Levin. We've already gone forth and said how it was strange that he would sell out his alleged conservative principles and convictions just for the fleeting hope of victory. It's almost like it's a truncated form of what Benjamin Franklin had said when he said that those who surrender essential liberties for a fleeting sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security. Those who surrender essential principles for a fleeting sense of victory should be viewed as sellouts and should not have victory. That's what it comes down to. It is a moral choice. And the moral choice here is not to support either of the candidates for the two mainstay political parties. And I'm sorry, but a great many of the third-party candidates don't fit the bill either. But back to Mark Levin. He's tried to defend Trump's tax issue. Recall that over the weekend, there was a very specific portion of Donald Trump's 1995 personal income tax returns that were leaked to the New York Times. And it shows that there was this glaring hole in his income tax returns that allowed him to skate by without having to pay taxes. This is something that Jeremy and I will be discussing in even greater detail this evening, but I think it's important to point here as we are getting closer to the election cycle. Again, only 34 days away, folks. I think that the pressure and the tension is ratcheting up on those who jumped ship to support Trump. And I've got a soundbite of Mark Levin here defending Trump. And I'm going to go ahead and cue that up now so that we can hear what he said, and then we'll delve into it in a little greater detail. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that right now.
Isn't it amazing that there's almost no ethical issue raised when somebody leaks a portion of somebody else's taxes to a newspaper, which happily obliges and prints the information? Oh, I know he's running for president, but really, ladies and gentlemen, that could happen to any of us now. And really, the reaction from the media and others should be disgust and contempt by such an unconscionable act. But liberals don't seem to mind these sorts of things. After all, they did turn the Internal Revenue Service into a political operation against conservatives and Tea Party organizations, didn't they? And the media didn't care about that either. Now, if it had been a Republican, they'd want his impeachment or her impeachment. So whatever are in Trump's tax returns ultimately, he follows the law, he follows the law.
Following the law really doesn't have anything to do with it. And that's just part of the problem. It's not that following the law necessarily means that he's doing the right thing. Stop and think about this for a moment, folks. It's that what Trump is doing is he's going forth and he's working in a way that is working to personally aggrandize himself. It's always about himself and what he wants to do, and never about the people. That's why he's gone forth and he's tried to paint himself as a paragon of conservative virtue, it wasn't because that's what he literally believes. It's because that's how he wants to be perceived. He knows that that's how he can buy votes. And of course, it's always about perception with him. And not just with him, it's with anyone that is involved with him. He's about branding. That's what he's made his fortune off of, not off of some meaningful conversion to conservatism, not for being some paragon of virtue and values. But that's a problem. Trump is the one who created this mess. He has had he's had ample opportunity to take the sting out of this in law. If you want to present a favorable view of your client to the jury, and there's something negative with respect to your client, you present the shortcomings up front. It's called taking the sting or the bite out of it. But he hasn't done that. He's let it linger, and that allows people to speculate as to what his motives are and what is driving him. But here's the thing. That's the problem. Trump is playing like the law says that he can't release his returns. We knew this would be a problem. It's standard procedure these days for any candidate vying for the highest office in the land to release their tax returns. Claiming that he's under a routine audit doesn't cut it. Richard Nixon was under audit by the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, when he released his taxes. It creates a problem when even Nixon was more forthcoming than the current GOP nominee. This is what fuels the left. And we all knew the media was going to run with this. That's something Jeremy and I predicted here a year ago, folks. That's, again, one of the problems. The GOP doesn't stand for anything anymore. They didn't in 2008 or in 2012 or in 2014, and they still don't in 2016. I also want to address the point that Levin made about it being legal. Sure, it's legal, but why not admit it up front? Again, Trump is vying for an office of the highest public trust, yet he gives me no reason to believe that he should be entrusted with said public trust. He's like a kid in a candy store. Everything is a shiny object to him, and he allows his attention span to be divided. He allows that to drive him to push for something more at the expense of we the people, who are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this country. But that's not the way that he thinks of it. And it's not the way that the Trump camp has been producing it or putting it forth. And so the public trust has not been earned. We have to be cautious about this, because if we're not, then it falls into the trap of fulfilling and satisfying all of those two-dimensional caricatures that the left attempts to pigeonhole the right with, and they've done it in election cycle after successive election cycle. The longer that this goes forth, and the more that Trump continues to ensnare himself in these problematic areas, the greater the ammunition and fodder that the left has to sling at the right, to stereotype all of us to fit him. It's as though he is the answer to their prayers for statism to become the central pin, the focal point of our electoral process. But that's just not true. It's not who we are. It's not what we represent. It's not what this nation was all about or is all about. But again, Levin doesn't mention any of that. Instead, he attempts to deflect the issue back to Hillary. And I've got another soundbite that I'm going to cue up here, folks, with respect to that, and then I'll be right back to discuss it in further detail with you. So here we go.
The law. The idiot running against him, Hillary Clinton, she was in a position to write it or rewrite it or do whatever the hell she wanted to. Wasn't she? About the big dummy in the Oval Office and the other dummy who sits outside the Oval Office, a.k.a. Joe Biden. I mean, if this is so outrageous, the way you can deduct a loss, which doesn't seem all that outrageous to me, I mean, I don't invest in these heavy duty things. But so what? Then why is it in there? Where's that 7 IQ doofus Harry Reid? Why didn't he do anything about it? The Democrats controlled the Congress for 2 years and the White House.
But here's the problem, Mark. It's not about the Democrats. It's not. We all know the Democrats are corrupt. That's why we want to get back to the Constitution. I thought that was one of the focal points of your show, one of the things that you always focused upon, something that you always thought was in the forefront, something that should be front and center in our electoral process. But the problem is, Mark, you're not standing for that. You have sold your principles, and you are now having to bear the consequences of it. And I recall that when you first did switch to the Trump camp and joined the Lion Branch Trumpidian Tabernacle, you tried to claim that you could not be held accountable or responsible for the stupid things that either Trump or his surrogates say. But here's the deal. By saying that you're going to vote for him, that is the ultimate endorsement of the spineless weasel. It means that you are throwing your lot in with him, and that means that you will be tarred and feathered by the same broad brush that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media will use against all conservatives. But even more so, and to even greater effect with you, because you have sown your support with him. You have linked your fate, for lack of a better term, to this unsustainable, unelectable, but above all, unacceptable candidate. It doesn't matter that the Democrats are corrupt. Because, again, the fact that Trump is showing this lack of credibility plays into the caricature that the left always attempts to pigeonhole the right with in America, as I just mentioned. Levin ought to know this. The other thing is, Trump has gone forth and proclaimed that the wealthy should pay their fair share, yet he doesn't do it himself. Again, he goes out and trumpets one of the lines of Hillary Rotten Clinton, that of do as I say, not as I do. It's not just a line, it's actually more of the example of what she does, or how she goes out and professes her message. She doesn't follow all of this class warfare nonsense that has become the bedrock default position of the Democrat Party. She lives in great opulence with great wealth. It's just that she doesn't want any of the rest of us to have it. And that too plays into this entire circus-like scenario and works against the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. But again, somewhere there's a disconnect. Somewhere conservatives feel that they have to go out and be an apologist for this man. Why? He doesn't stand for, nor does he represent anything that we hold near and dear. He doesn't advocate or promote conservatism. He pays lip service to it, but that's about it. In fact, that is all there is to it. Folks, the other thing to keep in mind, when Trump said that the wealthy should pay their fair share, that's code language from the left. It's about constructing a false narrative. And we all know that's destructive. It's destructive to the point that it distracts from the things that matter. It drives us away from the central message that we need to be advocating. And it empowers the left by emboldening them. You see, it emboldens them because they say, look, see, looky, everything we've said about the right is true. Just look at who they have nominated. Look at who they have vying for the highest office in the land. Do you really want to trust this guy? And then, of course, the Lion Branch Trumpidians are going to try to flip that on its head and say that it's those of us who cannot in good conscience vote for the man that caused this. Because Hillary will be able to say, see, he can't even get the entire Republican electorate to support him. But that is a red herring, folks. It's something that once again plays into their devious mindset And it's no one's fault but their own for pushing this unviable candidate down the rest of our throats against our will. And why is it that we have to accept that? Why does Levin not want to be forthcoming with the fact that Trump is giving the left a proverbial gold mine here? He wants to ignore it because he's becoming a cheerleader. He's nothing short of a cheerleader, and that, in my mind, is disgusting. It's unacceptable. We can't accept that. But here's the thing. Hillary has already gone on the offensive with this, folks. And I've got yet another soundbite that I'm going to cue up here with respect to that. And then I will discuss it a little bit when it's played through. But here, I'm going to go ahead and switch on over to that right now.
You may have heard that he has long refused to release his tax returns the way every other nominee for president has done for decades. You can look at 40 years of my tax returns. I think we need a law that says if you become the nominee of the major party, you have to release your tax returns. Now, a lot of us were wondering, what is he hiding? It must be really terrible. Well, the New York Times has discovered at least part of the answer. Back in the 1990s, Trump apparently lost $1 billion in a single year on bad investments and failing casinos. Now, how anybody can lose $1, let alone $1 billion, in the casino industry is kind of beyond me, right? It's just hard to figure. But as a result, doesn't look like he paid a dime of federal income tax for almost 2 decades. Now, while millions of American families, including mine and yours, were working hard, paying our fair share, it seems he was contributing nothing to our nation.
Now, what is that garbage? You see, that's the problem. By Trump refusing to go forth and release his personal federal income tax returns, he gives ammo to Hillary so that she can say, I think there needs to be a law. There doesn't need to be a damn law, except that Trump refuses to do the right thing. She then poses the question of, what is he hiding? Yeah, that is something that we ought to be concerned about. That is exactly the sort of narrative that's going to shine through each and every time that they attempt to do this. Again, because it is not rooted or based in anything factual other than the fact that he refuses to release the tax return. So he is creating this perception. And recall, folks, that in the arena of American politics, a perception, whether it be faulty or not, is oftentimes more impactful and more meaningful than the truth. We even did a Solo Flight special edition covering that very topic earlier during this fiasco that is the 2016 presidential election cycle. And again, Trump has not been effective going forth and trying to show that he is capable of organizing a decent campaign, that he is capable of going forth and doing what is necessary to build this nation back up. And that's a problem. It's a problem we can't ignore, and it's one that continues to grow. Trump can ill afford to have these sorts of damaging questions pointed at him, but pointed at him they are and will continue to be. So, much like what we have to keep in mind here is that while he can ill afford this, being asked what is he hiding, it's very similar to how he could ill afford to run the casinos in Atlantic City the way that he did. Then, recalling that his daughter wants there to be free government nanny care, and the way that Trump himself wants to raise a federally mandated minimum wage of $15 an hour, it just doesn't work. Someone has to pay for it all. But it also allowed Hillary to assume an intellectually disingenuous position. She was able to try and act like she's an ordinary American working hard to contribute to this nation. What a bunch of bovine excrement. It is not the truth. And she is not like the rest of America. But because Trump fell into this trap and allowed the left and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to orchestrate the narrative, instead of being prepared for it, because we all know that the media will always stand in staunch opposition to the alleged conservative each and every time. And now they expect us to be in a tizzy about it. They expect us to be frustrated about it. Well, I'm sorry, I can't, when we said this is exactly what would happen. So here it is. Clinton hasn't worked hard to contribute to this nation. She, like Trump, has worked tirelessly to attack the nation, going against the Constitution. Again, the Constitution should be the litmus test, but no one is talking about the Constitution, save for us here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Now, why is that? We already know, by his own admission, that Trump does not find any inherent or intrinsic value in our shared Constitution. That's why he admitted that he's never once read it through from cover to cover. Again, it's about orchestrating a system unto itself, for himself, to enrich himself at the expense of we the people. That's no different than Hillary Clinton, except that she can now take this just ridiculous claim that she is on the moral high ground, that she is contributing to the nation where Trump is not. And the fact that it's only the part of 1995 where he had reported in a single year losses of about $916 million, that's just staggering. Now, maybe that's just business as usual and par for the course in the way that business is done in Trump's field, but not really. I don't think so. I think that this, once again, fully, fundamentally, and clearly demonstrates that Trump is not fit to hold office, that he's not qualified. And we have to be cognizant of that. We have to be aware of that. But of course, the Lion Branch Trumpidians are going to do what they've done all throughout this fiasco of a 2016 presidential election cycle. And that is, they're going to attempt to sweep it under the rug. Because there can be no dirt, and there can be no mistakes made by their fearless leader. But it's not true. It does not come forth to shine the light of truth on it. But we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have always said that the truth has a way of shining through. That it has a way of penetrating through the muck and the web of deceit woven by those nefarious forces who want nothing short of pitting American citizen against American citizen, so that we are so distracted by infighting and that we are so wounded by self-inflicted wounds that we cannot overcome the nonsense that they are forcing down our throats. That is a dangerous position to be placed in, but it is the position that we are facing. And that is the problem with a Trump candidacy. It's why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have warned you about it going back to our premiere episode in September 11th of 2015. It all comes down to a matter of trust, folks. The problem is, none of the main contenders for the White House are trustworthy. We have wound up with the worst of the worst. And those who are supposed to be the watchdog for the people have let the people down. Trust in the so-called conservative media should be at an all-time low, folks. Think of it like having a guide to show you around while on safari. These guides are not only lacking in any sort of a clue as to where they're going, but they are also hoping to abandon the American people without a second thought. To solve our problems, we have to go back to the Constitution, But that isn't going to happen under either one of these two main candidates who are vying for the highest office in the land. I'm sorry, folks, there is just no way around that whatsoever. Just none. Folks, the theme for today, if you haven't guessed already, is that of trust. So, speaking of trust, Trump runs out and hits the microphones again and is essentially sticking his foot in his mouth. That is just one of those things we have seen reiterate itself time and again to the point of being ad nauseum throughout this election cycle. And it's shocking and staggering in a way to see how he always does that. But here's the part that really stuck out to me. It's that he's proud of his corruption, and his arrogance shines through as he speaks to the American people. And I've got the soundbite for this that I'm going to go ahead and cue up right now so that we can hear it, and then I'll delve back into basically have a little bit of analysis with it once it's done. So here we go.
Understand the tax laws better than almost anyone, which is why I am one who can truly fix them. I understand it. I get it. And that is what I commit to do. We want fairness. We want money brought in, and we want money to be spent when it goes out, because they spend our tax dollars so unfairly and unwisely. Remember that. As a businessman and real estate developer, I have legally used the tax laws to my benefit and to the benefit of my company, my investors, and my employees. I mean, honestly, I have brilliantly used those laws. I have often said on the campaign trail that I have a fiduciary responsibility to pay no more tax than is legally required, like anybody else. Or, put another way, to pay as little tax as legally possible. And I must tell you, I hate the way they spend our tax dollars.
Well, that's good of you to hate the way that they spend it, but that's not what the problem is. Because again, it comes back to that theme of trustworthiness. Look, just because something's legal doesn't make it right. Now, we know that. We know that it's basically legal to go out and try and short sell on the stock market or to declare bankruptcy. But does that make it morally right? Not necessarily so. Look, in the common law, whenever the law mandates a standard, it's considered the bare minimum. It's a floor. It's the absolute minimum that you can do. And it's like passing the bar, as an example. That doesn't mean that the lawyer is the most skilled attorney since Perry Mason. It means that they have met the minimum standards to be deemed competent to practice law. That's it. Doesn't mean that you're going to be getting the best legal counsel or representation. That can only come through experience. It's the bare protection available. And of course, that's what the bar claims that they're doing by requiring attorneys to go forth and to take the bar exam, to pass the bar exam. It's to meet a very minimal floor so that the general public that is going to be using the attorneys will be able to trust that the work that they're doing is not going to be incompetent. And it also means that the bar is there to hold the attorneys accountable for when they fail to meet the minimum. Now, if the attorney goes forth and holds out that they will do more, that they are the best, well, then that means that the attorney will be held to that standard. And if you listen to the way that Trump was discussing how he utilized the tax system to his advantage, he's suggesting that it was brilliant, that he just somehow magically is the best of the best when it comes to all of that. But again, that sort of puffery is not mere puffery. That is suggesting that he's doing more. And then to discuss the fiduciary duties, yes, that's laughable. It's really laughable in the way that he set that up, because he's not literally discussing the whole truth of it. And a fiduciary duty is a very important thing, and I will delve a bit more into what they are as we go along. But just back to what Trump was saying, he's essentially saying that he can do anything, that he can get away with anything, that no one will ever hold him accountable for the things that he said and for the things that he's done. And that's just par for the course with him, but it does not mean that what he's saying is true. The other thing with what Trump mentioned in that soundbite is that whole fiduciary duty thing. That's a bigly word for the hair scholar, and he didn't really explain what it means. He just used that as a buzzword to get the crowd going. And recall that he's exhibited this throughout the entire 2016 presidential election cycle. He's even gone forth and said that if ever he feels an audience is not opening up to him or reacting the way that he would like, the way that he plays them is that he'll just mention the wall and they'll go wild. But does that translate into being an effective nominee? Does that translate to being a good and decent president of the United States? Of course, the answer to that is no. But back to the fiduciary duty. A fiduciary duty is defined as a legal obligation of one party to act in the best interests of another. And the obligated party is typically a fiduciary, that is, someone entrusted with the care of money or property, also called fiduciary obligation. So what he's basically saying there is that he had a fiduciary duty or obligation to his employees? No, the answer to that is no. He certainly didn't go forth with good faith and fair dealing, which is the most common type of fiduciary duty out there with the subcontractors that he's hired. There are numerous lawsuits that have been filed against Trump with respect to his failure to pay, his failure to act in the best interest of those people that he hired to accomplish something. Think back to the Polish brigade that he used to help tear down the Bonwit Teller building, but then refused to pay. Again, it shows that there is always an ulterior motive with him. And that's something that we can ill afford to just allow to fly by when we're going to be entrusting the highest office, or potentially entrusting the highest office in the land, to this guy. And if he cheats his employees, what in the hell is going to stop him from cheating the American people? That is one of the major points of contention and concern that we have with respect to Donald Trump here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. And it's not something that I can just simply brush aside or sweep under the rug or ignore. But the other aspect of the fiduciary duty to keep in mind here is that with these corporations, yes, there is a fiduciary duty for the shareholders. And of course, Trump has a way, again, of trying to make it sound as though it's as if he's operating in something that just isn't so. Recall that he claimed that he went to the Wharton School of Business. Folks, the Wharton School of Business is typically a graduate level school, meaning a master's degree. Trump has no master's degree. He just has a bachelor's degree in anthropology. Not even in business, not even in real estate, none of it. It's just in anthropology. And in this case, he's making it sound as though he is part of some large publicly traded corporation. And yes, there are greater fiduciary duties in those situations. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. There is nothing with respect to Trump's companies that are publicly traded. They aren't publicly traded. So the shareholders in close held corporations are usually family members. Now, we've all seen the type of nepotism or favoritism that he showers on his own children, saying that he'd give cabinet positions to Ivanka, his daughter, who he who, if you recall, says that we have to have free nanny care and that we have to deal with the quote unquote disparation of income, the wage gap with women, even though that literally is not a true thing. That's what they do. They create this grandiose false perception. And of course, in politics, as we have reiterated numerous times on previous episodes, perception, even false perceptions, are more often than not more meaningful, more impactful than reality in the system of polity. And so that's what he's doing. He's going forth and assuming an intellectually disingenuous position. And we must be cognizant of that fact because he is basically fulfilling all of these caricatures that the left lambasts the right with in politics on a daily basis. But all of this is nothing new with the Trump family. In fact, it dates back to good old Grandpappy Trump, who was a draft dodger from Germany. That's why he came to the United States. He tried to use prostitution and prey upon desperate prospectors during the Klondike Gold Rush when he had his operations set up in Washington State, or what would become Washington State. And it was all about self-aggrandizement. And Trump always does that. Another example of how something is legal but isn't morally correct is the way that Trump wanted to use the Kello case to utilize eminent domain to oust an old lady from her home in order to build some damn limo parking lot for his casinos. Now, folks, yes, the Kello case or the Kello decision made that perfectly legal. Although it really isn't when you stop and think about it, when you parse it out and get into the nitty-gritty of it. But again, he portrays this in such a way as to proclaim that what he's doing is just using the laws and using the system for his benefit. But that doesn't mean that you're using it in the right way. Again, it goes back to that whole notion of the law setting a minimal floor, a base, the least you can do. You can do more. The law certainly allows you to do more. And in the case of Donald Trump, I think that he should have done more, but he hasn't done more. He has just embraced this, and he has just used this in this sort of just intellectually disingenuous fashion. And it is going to come back and haunt us because it is another arrow in the quiver of the left to use to snipe him. And we have said that this would be the case all the way back to last year. We have been pounding that over and over and over again because it is something that is being ignored. Those that are within power right now are ignoring that. And it's intellectually disingenuous. So, eminent domain being used to oust some lady for a parking lot doesn't even make sense. Not when you're looking to serve the best interest of the electorate. That's the problem. Trump is still looking at this from a business standpoint or perspective. However, the United States is not a business. It cannot be run as a business because our rights are in the mix. This is why Jeremy and I say that our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights can never be placed on the bargaining table. Why? Because they're immutable, except under due process. However, those who will be apologists for Trump will try and claim that there is due process under the law when he was attempting to use eminent domain, that there was a notice and a hearing. And yes, folks, that is what we know as procedural due process. Yes, that is something to be taken into consideration. But the notice and a hearing, okay, fair enough. There was notice and a hearing. Great, wonderful. But let's take a look at the Fifth Amendment to discern what eminent domain was originally intended for. It says, in pertinent part, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Now, folks, you notice I stressed the word public in use. Public use. Okay, why? What is that talking about? Well, building a limo parking lot for a casino in Atlantic City is not a public use. It's for private benefit. That's the problem with the Kello decision. It allows eminent domain to be perverted so that it's used for private gain. In other words, that it's being used in such a fashion as to allow the government to come in and say that your fundamental and inalienable God-given right to keep and hold property is now truncated. And therefore, because this person is going to build some sort of business interest on your property, utilizing it in a way that creates an alleged greater tax base, then we're going to go ahead and take your property away, pay you pennies on the dollar for it, oust you, and condemn it. Why? Why? Because it's about greed. Power, corruption, and greed. The trifecta of an illegitimate, rogue, and tyrannical government. And that always comes to the forefront. That always plays out in that fashion. Again, because they don't believe that the rights are equal. But recall that we do have equal protection under the law, and that we do have this idea that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men. And so what that means is that the law is supposed to apply equally to everyone. And if you look at the Ninth Amendment, it specifically states that none of the rights are to be read in such a way as to infringe upon the other rights or to belittle the other rights. But that is what the Kello decision does. And Trump is an advocate for that position. Trump has said that he loves eminent domain. But again, that is not an intellectually genuine position to take. It's not an honest position to take. It's one in which he is placing the American people in a terrible position. Because it means that one of those foundational rights, one of those natural law tenets that forms the bedrock foundation and basis not only of our shared United States Constitution, but also of our representative republic, are being truncated. Recall that in the poetic language that Thomas Jefferson penned down in the Declaration of Independence, he said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Okay, good, there's the first part. And that they are endowed by their Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, again, this is borrowed from Lockean thought. You know, John Locke, the British philosopher who essentially formed one of the original social contract theories, which is that the natural law exists and that we have these contracts that exist and can be universally understood by applying logic. He said life, liberty, and property. That's what the pursuit of happiness is. The ability to own property. And of course, Trump, as we have so oft times reiterated before here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, has attempted to trample upon that right, to abridge that right for private gain. And he did that as a private citizen. Imagine what he could do for his children's company if he hands the company off to them, should he be entrusted with the highest office in the land. These are the sorts of things that cannot be ignored. But Mark Levin and the others that have become apologists and pom-pom carrying cheerleaders for him are disregarding that. They're ignoring it. They don't believe that it is necessary to focus upon that or to consider that an important issue. Well, damn, I think it is. Look at all that he could do. And the fact that he shows no signs of constraint, that he lacks any inhibitions to restrain himself, I think that that plays out in a dangerous way. And it certainly fulfills the narrative of the left. The left is just jumping up and down with joy because he is fulfilling the sort of just ludicrous henny penny the sky is falling type of prophecy that they have put forth with the right. Why is it that we allow this to come to fruition? Why is it that we sacrifice those things that matter the most just for a fleeting sense of victory? Again, that is a laughably stupid position for the conservative movement in this nation to take, but it is where we are, and there's just no way around it. But again, because of the Kellogg decision, Trump apologists can claim that what he attempted to do was perfectly legal. Mark Levin might try and twist himself into a pretzel to make this work. But pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, it's clear that they meant eminent domain solely or strictly for public use. Again, the founding fathers were very concerned about property rights. Think of the way that the Third Amendment prohibits the quartering of soldiers in your home. It's because that sort of nonsense took place all throughout that long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence. And they did not want to see that come to fruition in this new nation that they had constructed. And again, it ties into this notion that one of those fundamental rights, meaning that it's endowed to you by God Almighty, God Omnipotent, is the right to keep and hold property. But Trump does not believe in that. Trump does not believe in the sanctity of that right, which makes him no different than Hillary Clinton. So again, whenever we hear this sort of nonsensical argument pushing for a tyranny of false unity based on this laughable notion of the lesser of two evils, we have to take a step back, pause, and consider whether that is true or not. And truth be told, it is not true. Because again, they are both assuming a position that is contrary to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Folks, there really is no way around that. And to try and do that is to play the worst sort of game of semantics and political kabuki theater imaginable. But here we are. The intellectual disingenuousness of this entire 2016 election cycle is palpable. It is real. It is something that is so concrete that you can practically reach out and touch it. But again, we need to focus on this whole notion of public use. What is it? Well, public use is the justification to acquire property by eminent domain. It is the only purpose for which private property can be taken or condemned by the government under its power of eminent domain. So eminent domain is essentially saying, look at it, it's saying eminent, meaning must be done, domain, meaning property or control. It is the eminent control of the government to take that for government use. But what Kellogg did and what Trump has advocated for when he's gone forth in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media is to proclaim that private property, irrespective of whether that's used as a dwelling, irrespective of the sentimental personal value that it holds to the property owner, can be taken to be converted for private use. So in other words, the government can just run in, take your property, and hand it over to a private developer, all for this greedy notion of being able to use that property for a greater tax base. Folks, that is not public use. That is public abuse. But it's also abuse of the true ultimate wielder of popular sovereignty in this country, we the people. Again, when you think back to the opening lines, to the preamble to our Constitution, it didn't say we the politicians create this government, or we the bigly property developers have come together to create a more perfect union and establish a constitution. No, it says we the people. Again, it means that the rights that are immutable, that are endowed to us by our Creator as George Mason had concluded when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia that ultimately became the basis for the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. We own the country. We own the government. We own our property. And the only time is after notice and a hearing for public use and just compensation, meaning for fair market value, which again is another, I almost want to call it a legal fiction because it's never going to really be the same amount that the property was worth. Then they can take it, and only then, and for that limited purpose. And when it goes away from that limited purpose, at least until Kello, then it is an improper taking. And there's an entire code of property law dealing with that. And it has to be disputed. And it has to come back to this notion that we, the people, are the ones that are endowed by our Creator with certain fundamental and inalienable rights, and that property is one of those. It's not the government. It's not other private developers, because recall that one of the most critical aspects of how our representative Republican form of government works is that our rights end where another individual popular sovereign's rights begin. But of course, that's not how this is being shown. Not at all. And that's a problem. It truly is a problem. And so, again, this is something which is both foreign and alien to Trump. He doesn't consider that the rights of the individual should be placed on a pedestal. Think of the way that he said that the Bureau of Land Management, Manipulation, and Malarkey can own 90% of the land in our westerlymost states, and that he doesn't trust the states to deal with it, and he doesn't trust private developers because it's got to be great. It's got to be great, man. I got smally hands, and I want the land to be great and perfect here forever. But that's not how it works. And when we are lacking in that knowledge and understanding of our Constitution and of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, it allows us to become susceptible to the twisted machinations of these charlatans, carnival barkers, and con artists like Trump. And so for him to come out and say that he's wanting to make America robust again, there's nothing in his platform that suggests it. Because his platform, by his own admission, to the words that came out of his own mouth, are mere suggestions. And that he'll change. Recall that his ousted campaign director there, Paul Manafort, had tried to comfort the establishment bigwigs of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, by saying that what you're seeing in those stump speeches is just an act, that the real Trump will shine through during the election cycle. Of course, that did not come to fruition. I think the real Trump is that Trump has no identity, that he has no core values, principles, or convictions, and that's just who the man is. But it's laughable to think that this is the position that we find ourselves in. Because when you look at it and the way that it plays out, it's not working in our best interests. But above all, what this shows is that Trump lacks the basic understanding of the Constitution, which should be the only thing that we consider of importance. Sure, whoever leaked his tax returns to the New York Times is wrong. And there's even some questions as to whether he did it himself, which Jeremy and I will discuss later this evening. But it's even more evidence that Trump is willing to do anything to help himself, and that he lacks the prerequisite restraint that's necessary for him to be president. The office of president was never meant to be infused with this much power, and neither candidate has real-world solutions for this, because, again, they're all for expanding exponentially the power of government. This is why we say that conservatism has been pushed out of this election. Neither candidate espouses truly conservative positions. Gary Johnson isn't a true libertarian either. In other words, we have three of the most useless candidates of all living memory. There's really no way around this point of fact. It's there, clear as day, for anyone who observes this in an objective fashion. Again, a virtuous republic requires a well-informed populace and leaders who are moral, but above all trustworthy. So you see, there's that theme of trust again. None of the candidates vying for the highest office right now, as I sit here, speaking into this microphone, conveying this message to you, are trustworthy. And that is part of the problem. It means that we are not living up to what Sam Adams said that we must. That in order for our society to work and for the republic to work, it must be a virtuous one with a well-informed public and decent moral leaders. 2016 just doesn't have that, folks. It clearly, simply does not. Now, folks, we're going to stick with that theme of trust. And here's the interesting thing. Tonight is going to be the evening of the VP or vice presidential candidate debate. One of the problems that Mike Pence is going to face tonight is that the focus will be on Trump's tax returns. Again, this is one of the reasons why, if I had been a Trump advisor, which I'd have to drink copious amounts of alcohol if that were the case, I would be advising him, or I would have advised him, to release his tax returns much sooner. That way you're taking the bite out of it. I know that I mentioned that in the first segment, but it's of the utmost importance and needs to be mentioned again, because literally what Trump is doing here is he is allowing his own foibles and shortcomings to become a distractor, distracting attention away from the issues. But again, I think that that's been his goal all along, that he hasn't really been focusing on what's important or on what's in the best interest of the American people. And again, it's shocking and staggering, really, when you stop and think about it, that this is the current state of affairs that is ailing and afflicting the American system of polity. Because it seems as though everything is about a popularity contest. It's this cult of personality as opposed to standing up for what matters, instead of going forth for what issues matter to the people. And again, that was kind of the sense that I got with Lester Holt in that first presidential candidate debate a while back. Because again, none of those issues were of the sort that I would consider to be impactful or important to the people. But it's just par for the course with this propagandistic narrative and agenda that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are attempting to foist upon the American people. They want us to think it's important, but what they're focusing on really isn't. And it's not to just say that the media is unfair, because that's certainly been the theme of people like Mark Levin and Lush Bimbo and all the other sellouts that have adopted Trumperism. We knew that the media is unfair. And to now all of a sudden proclaim that that is something that we need to focus on, no, it's beyond belief. And certainly the media is going to be unfair to Pence in this kiddie car debate, or the kiddie pool debate, for lack of a better term, because he is the surrogate for Trump. He is the chief surrogate for Trump because he is his running mate. And so there's simply no way around the fact that Trump's tax returns are going to be a central issue. It's because it's a hot button issue right now. It's what the media is just frothing at the mouth over right now. And it's for that reason that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, say that Trump is dangerous, because his off-the-wall antics come back to haunt his apologists each and every time. Pence will be on the defensive from the get-go. In other words, he's going to be in a weakened position, not operating from a position of strength, which, when you consider that Hillary Clinton and Kaine are some of the weakest candidates that the Democrats have ever foisted upon their base in half a century, that's clearly saying something. The Trumpidians will point the fingers at the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. That's what they always do. But that's to be expected. As I've already mentioned, the media doesn't like us. They never have. And so we've got to get past this point of thinking that if we just cry and whine about it, that that's somehow going to fix it. That's not a solution. That's just pointing fingers and attempting to skirt the issue. And we can't afford to skirt the issue. We really cannot. But here's the thing. We warned that it would come down to this, and that Trump is falling into every trap that's out there. He simply cannot help himself. It's as though he just feels this insatiable need to go out and be a gaffe machine. He makes Joe Biden look level-headed. You know, Shotgun Joe. That is quite an accomplishment, and not in a good way. Not in a good way at all. The problem with Trump is that he's just not qualified. And unfortunately, that is showing through. It's just one of those things we can't escape. But here's the thing. The other aspect that is going to shine through is that political mistakes will also be the focus of this evening's debate. We all know that both of these candidates are wildly unpopular, and their VP candidates can't change this fact. That's why I've always thought it so funny that they say, well, if he chooses a conservative vice president running mate, in which they're claiming Pence is, and I'll get more into why I find that to be a rather dubious claim here in a bit, that makes him tolerable. Recall what I said with respect to Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. The whole reason that Roosevelt was ever able to become president, because the bigwigs of the gutless opposition party, or GOP at that time, did not ever want him to wield the reins of political power, is because that he was put in the VP position. They put him in the VP position because it's a largely ceremonial role. It's certainly one without any power. So if that is going to make a choice more conservative, I don't see how. I don't see how, because it doesn't matter. And that's why I say that the VP candidates can't change the fact that both of the candidates for the mainstay political parties in the United States won't change it. The odd thing is that it keeps getting touted that more people will vote in this election cycle than in any previous presidential election. And I mean, that's a good thing. We definitely want people to be invested in the process. We want people to care about their civic duties. And we certainly want people to be able to freely exercise their fundamental and inalienable God-given right to vote. But what does it mean? It's sad, really. I mean, yes, as I said, it's good that people are exercising their inalienable right to vote, but what a shame that it has to be for two of the least ethical candidates in American history. And folks, stop and think about just exactly what that means. Stop and think about the impact that that's going to have on the nation at large. Because when we recall that Sam Adams said that we must be a virtuous republic, meaning that the people must be knowledgeable about the political process, and that the candidates themselves have to be moral and upstanding, that's what we're lacking right now. So we are not fulfilling our duty and our obligation of being a virtuous republic, which we were tasked to be by our founding fathers. What a shame. Literally, what a shame. And we know, of course, viewer expectations for this debate are low. How can they not be? The bar has been set so low with debates. Look at the way that Trump was a fiasco during the primary process. Just flinging and hurling ad hominem attacks, not sticking to the issues, not projecting anything of value to the American people, not showing any connection or understanding of the American people or those values that we hold near and dear. You see, that's the problem. Neither one of these candidates, and I'm even going to lump Gary Johnson, the pot smoker, in there too, stand for the values that we intrinsically understand to be important. None of these things are going to restore this nation to the path to prosperity, and that's the problem. So it's a bit of a circus act. It's a circus side freak show, for lack of a better term. That's what is unfurling before our very eyes, and that is what makes this 2016 election cycle so depressing. But we know, with the bar being set low by Trump's abysmal performance during the first presidential debate against Hillary, it's going to be even lower for this one. Even some of his most staunch supporters were flummoxed by his abysmal performance. Again, this is probably the real reason why Trump ducked out of so many debates during the primary process. Occam's razor applies here, folks. You know, that's where whatever the simplest explanation is, that's most likely the one that applies. Well, it applies here. That's what we're seeing. It does apply here. And so, this is why our primaries matter. And unfortunately, America, we blew it. Instead of sticking with the constitutional compositionist, we chose this carnival barker, the snake oil salesman. That just cannot work for us. But going back to this whole notion of the vice presidential candidate debate, another question is, can Pence really help Trump in this debate? Again, it kind of falls back on that position of whether a VP candidate can really do anything. Because, again, it's for an office that is largely ceremonial. Truth be told, I don't think he can. Pence, again, is no recompense for Trump. As I mentioned in one of our prior Solo Flight special editions, he has his own shortcomings with respect to the illegal alien dilemma that haunts this nation. Recall that he is one of those that pushed for amnesty. Now, maybe that was the way that they were going to try and make Trump more palatable for the detente wing of the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP. But again, recall that Trump has advocated for touchback amnesty, where they can go back and come to the front of the line and be welcome to that big, beautiful gate that we're going to put in the wall that Mexico's going to pay for because Smalley hands. It's ridiculous. It is wholly ridiculous. It literally is. But then Pence also has problems with flipping on Common Core. Yeah, sure, he said that he backed out of it. He's like John the Mushroom Kasich, whose daddy was a mailman. Rejecting Common Core, but essentially implementing those standards at a state level, which is again taking control away from the parents. And again, one of our constitutional rights, part of the pursuit of happiness, is the ability to raise one's children as one sees fit. So taking power away from parents doesn't work. But it falls into that laughable notion of what Hillary has said. It takes a village to raise a child. A village. What? The village people are going to come and sing and raise your children? Is that literally where we are in America today? Well, it sure seems like it. But the other problem with Mike Pence is the religious liberty law that he backed down on. Those are all bad. Again, it just clearly demonstrates that conservatives simply do not have a voice in the 2016 election. I wish this wasn't the case, but clearly it is. One important note to take away from this, however, is that Pence is a much more polished orator than Trump. Now, I know a lot of the Lion Branch Trumpidians are going to sit there and say that, well, if you look at George W. Bush, he wasn't a polished orator. He wasn't a great speaker. Okay, fine. He wasn't. But he still had core values and principles. Now, that's not to say that Mike Pence doesn't, but with Trump, no. And the problem is, when you associate with such a ticket and attach your name to it and yuck it up with all of the unsavory, unsatiable desires and antics of Trump, you're essentially betraying those principles. And that's the problem with Pence. That is a problem that Pence is not going to be able to overcome. And then with the tax return fiasco and debacle, I just have a feeling that this is going to be a circus tonight. And the media is going to yuck it up. Media is just going to love this because it ties into their frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist agenda, which, as we have harped time and again here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is diametrically opposed to the hopes, dreams, aspirations, and future desires of the American people. It's not standing in a position that is in the best interest of the American people. And therefore, we're going to see the fiasco be just that. Nothing short of a fiasco, nothing short of a failure. And that's what it is. It is a failure. They are failing the base of the party, and every time the Republican Party attempts to go into these debate cycles, or not just debate cycles, but election cycles, refusing to stand on conservative values and principles, that's when we sail to inevitable defeat. And it is inevitable defeat. But I know we hear time and time again, well, this is such an important election cycle. If you don't vote for Trump, you're voting for Hillary. Spare me. Spare me. The fact that Trump is equally as revolting and equally as bad as Hillary speaks volumes about the problem that we have here. And Pence, as I mentioned, is no recompense for that. None whatsoever. But one important note with the Pence being a much better orator than Trump is that he can deliver a message. Recall that he had a radio show of his own, which is good. Nationally syndicated radio shows are good to have. We certainly enjoy having ours here. However, Trump has tied Pence's hands, and the gas of the head of the ticket trickled down, so to speak. So we see that Pence's main job throughout the electoral process thus far has been to mop up after Trump. So he has essentially become a glorified proverbial janitor for the mafioso quavioso. Isn't that great? Isn't that exactly the type of lofty position for Pence? It's a seemingly undignified position for a sitting governor of the state of Indiana. Nevertheless, we have to face the facts. Trump is the so-called larger-than-life candidate who continues to implode before our very eyes. And yes, folks, that is what he's doing. He is imploding. There's no other way to put that. You can't sugarcoat it and you can't candy coat it. It is just the fact. And we deal with nothing but facts here, with the dabbling of opinion. But so being the janitor for the larger-than-life candidate means that he can't stop the implosion. It's as though Trump wants to go out of his way to lose this thing, which is another reason why we don't think he's qualified for the highest office in the land. He just doesn't have the finesse for this sort of thing. Now, contrary to the claims of the Lion Branch Trumpidians, Trump also does not have America's best interests at heart. We wish that he did. He certainly goes out and tries to bloviate that that's his position. That's what he conveys to the media, and the media yucked it up all throughout the primary process. But again, they are fulfilling another near prophetic prediction that we made last year and all throughout the first part of this year, in that the media's turned on him. We said that they would. And yet Mark Levin, Lesh Bimbo, Laura Inkampf, Michael Weena Savage, all of those, oh, and Sean Wannity too, him above the others, they're acting like, oh my God, the media, oh, the bad media, the big bad media. Grow up. You know, if you're going to be going into a process where you know something is already going to be stacked against you, where the deck is stacked against you, you prepare for it. But recall that Trump said that he didn't prepare for that last debate. Trump is not one of those guys that prepares for anything. He doesn't believe it's necessary. He doesn't think he has to. But folks, that is something that shines through too. That is something, again, that cannot be ignored. It comes to the forefront. It is the epicenter of a lot of the problems that Trump faces. He lacks discipline. And when you are entrusted with as much power as the chief executive of the United States is, you have to be disciplined. You have to show constraint. And Pence is not going to be able to do that for Trump any more than Cain is going to be able to do it for Hillary. It's not that we have any love for Hillary. Hillary is disgusting. It's like the Greek god Janus, the two-faced god. Well, Hillary is one face, and Trump is the other face. And both of the faces are ghastly, horrific apparitions that should not be entrusted with the reins of political power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. But those that are pushing for and adhering to a tyranny of false unity are the ones that are going to push us down this path, this untenable, unacceptable path. Why? Why? We don't have to accept these things, but they want us to. Yet, folks, there's another angle on the trust front that needs to be discussed. The New York Attorney General has ordered that Trump's foundation cease and desist in collecting donations. The reason for this is that evidence has come forth which seemingly indicates that Trump utilized funding from his foundation to pay for his 2016 run. Folks, you really can't make this stuff up. It's like we're in Never Never Land. It's as though when you think that this election process and cycle can't get any worse, then you think, yeah, but Trump. Oh, and that's another interesting angle I want to discuss too, just for a moment. I know it's a bit off topic, but you know, we've always said, and this was originally coined by Pat and Stu with Glenn Beck, that the arguments in favor of Trump have always been, yeah, but Trump, yeah, but Trump. Well, now that he's the nominee, it's when you say, please show us how Trump is qualified or how he should be entrusted, or why he should be entrusted, rather, with the reins of political power, it becomes, yeah, but Hillary. Why do we have to hear this same inane, specious argument over and over again? Because recall that the clinical definition of insanity, folks, is to repeatedly do the same thing over and over, expecting a different result or outcome. There's not going to be a different result. There's not going to be a different outcome for those of us who are truly concerned about the future of this nation and who are loyal to the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, is the Constitution. We're not going to change unless Trump comes forth and fully demonstrates that he will abide by the Constitution. He hasn't done that. He's not going to do that. That's not who he is. And that's one of the things that's just not going to be discussed. But this illegal aspect here of utilizing funding from his charitable foundation for funding his campaign, that is illegal. So while all of the people like Mark Levin, you know, what he was doing there was great, it's not illegal. Well, unlike his sketchy tax dealings, this is illegal. It's yet another piece in the puzzle that is driving true constitutionalists up the wall. And yes, we are being driven up the wall. Why? Because this man is unacceptable. We can't tolerate this. It's just a surefire sign that Trump is not looking out for the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And why do we back down to this? Why must we surrender to a tyranny of false unity? This should be a challenge for every Lion Branch Trumpidian just emerging from the darkness of the Trumpidian tabernacle. Make an argument, a convincing argument, that we should accept Trump without mentioning Hillary Clinton. Explain to us why you support him. Advocate for your candidate. That's what a virtuous population, a well-informed population does. Well, you can't. You can't. It will fall short, just like Mark Levin's defense of the orange one fell short with this whole tax debacle. But here's the thing. It's because Trump has no respect for the law. Hillary doesn't have respect for the law. We know that too. We don't like that. We can't stand it. It goes against that whole notion that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men. But neither one of the candidates for the two mainstay political parties believe that the law applies to them. They both believe that they are somehow magically above the law. And that ignores equal protection under the law. It ignores every critical and fundamental aspect of our shared Constitution, and thereby our constitutionally endowed Federalist representative Republican form of government. So, what do we do? You know, Trump simply thinks that rules are meant to be broken, but no, they're not, particularly when it comes to government. Now, there are many laws and rules which aren't good, that are draconian in nature, but I don't believe this is one of them. I don't think you should be lying to people saying that you're going to be using the funding for charity or for some other purpose and then turn around and use it for your own self-gratification, your own self-enrichment. Why? Why would we accept that? Why would that be acceptable? The fact of the matter is it's not. And so when I asked, what do we do about it? You vote your conscience. Recall that that's what got so many boos for Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who at that time was standing on principle, but who has now, by his own conscience, decided that he needs to support Trump. I disagree with that. But you know, we said that we won't hold it against people to make decisions on their own. That's fine. I do hold it against Mark Levin a little bit just because he ought to know better. And Cruz ought to know better too, but Levin has a platform in which he can continue to expose Trump, and he does rather lackadaisically now for the problems that he has. But what Levin has done that irritates me is he's gone out and become an apologist, a cheerleader for Trump, just making excuses and trying to deflect it onto Hillary. It's not going to work, Marky. It just ain't. But these things aren't merely conspiracy theories that come out of the blue. Sure, the Lion Branch Trumpidians will claim that this is some sort of political hatchet job, and there's a lot of truth to it, but there's more to it than that. There is a lot more to it. In their mind, their fearless leader can do no wrong. This is part of that whole cult of personality. This is what they are stuck on stupid with, for lack of a better term. It just isn't true, though. I think it's more accurate to say that Trump can hardly do anything right. And this spells disaster for the general election, which, as we mentioned at the start of today's program, is a mere 34 days away. That's almost just a month away, folks. How do we overcome this? I believe the answer is that we simply cannot in this election cycle, because the answer is the Constitution, returning to the Constitution. And none of these morons want to go forth and do that. Why? Because, again, it ties into their twisted machinations of, well, we've just got to win. No, that's not what this is about. Trust is vital. Recall that Reagan said that we must trust but verify. The problem is there's no clear verification for Trump here. Recall that he said that it is the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party. And I've got that soundbite. I'm going to cue that up just for refreshing memory's sake. So here we go. I'm going to do that right now.
Paul Ryan's different. He's the Speaker of the House. He's the highest-ranking elected Republican in the country right now. He's the chairman of the convention. Back in March, you said he'd pay a price if he didn't get along with you. What is that price?
Well, we're going to see what happens. He wants to meet. He'd like to meet, and I think we're meeting on Thursday, and we'll just see what happens. It's just more drama, but I think it's a mistake not to do this. We want to bring the party together. Does the party have to be together? Does it have to be unified? I'm very different than everybody else, perhaps that's ever run for office. I actually don't think so. I think that
it doesn't have to be unified?
No, I don't think so. I think it would be better if it were unified. I think it would be there would be something good about it, but I don't think it actually has to be unified in the traditional sense. I'm going to do what I have to do. I have millions of people that voted for me because I have strong borders, because I want strong trade. I want good trade. I want trade. I don't want to be an isolationist, but what's happening with China, what's happening with Japan, what's happening with Mexico, they're just absolutely eating our lunch. It's a shame. It's terrible. So I have to stay true to my principles also. And I'm a conservative, but don't forget, this is called the Republican Party. It's not called the Conservative Party. You know, there are conservative parties. It's called the Republican Party.
Yeah. So that's going to build trust? That's why we should trust this man? I don't think so. Again, that isn't the way to build trust with America. It shows that he is in it for himself. And that's something we can ill afford. America has suffered enough already under the Obama regime. We don't need another narcissist in the White House. Unfortunately, that's all we've got. But we can continue to stand firm on the Constitution, and we can be the ones that say enough is enough, because only we can. That is the message of empowerment that we wish to deliver to you here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Folks, you can trust her because she has only the finest alcohol to serve you. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Wright Flyer. I also invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have, either here at our YouTube page or our Google Plus page or at Facebook. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton. It also has our Blogspot account, which has audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program. And then there's the Cafe Press account, which I'm also listing in the description of this program here, which has all sorts of trinkets and goodies: drinking glasses, shot glasses, hats, clothing, apparel, birthing, maternity clothing, dog clothing, tote bags, laptop sleeves, phone sleeves and protectors, buttons, bumper stickers, you name it, it's there, with either our traditional logo on it or our first class passenger logo on it. With such a wide array of products at reasonable prices, you can surely find something there that suits your need to show that you are truly independent and free of thought. Thank you again, folks. We will see you again next time. Please do take care.